In the early decades of the 9th century, the world that would become the Kingdom of the Isles did not yet exist. What existed instead was an archipelago of competing pressures: small Gaelic kingdoms in Scotland and Ireland. Monastic communities of extraordinary wealth and fragility also dotted the landscape. And from the northeast, a maritime force that monks described with a terror that makes their ink still feel urgent to read. The Norse raids on the British Isles began with the attack on the monastery at Lindisfarne in 793 AD. What followed was not a coordinated invasion, but something more improvisational and ultimately more transformative. Bands of Norse seafarers from Norway worked their way down the coastlines of Scotland and Ireland. Their core logic was economic. Monasteries sat at trade routes, stored precious metals, and were defended by men whose vows precluded serious resistance. But the pattern changed. Raiding requires distance. It requires the ability to strike and retreat before a response can form. When distances grew too long, the Norse did what maritime peoples throughout history have done. They stopped going home. Welcome back to Whispered Chronicles, echoes of forgotten lore. By the 830s and 840s, Norse longforts fortified harbor camps were appearing along the Irish coast. Dublin was established as one of the most significant, functioning as a trading post and military installation. The same logic applied to the islands of the Scottish west coast: Orkney, Shetland, the Hebrides. Here the Norse did not simply raid and retreat. They wintered. They planted. They stayed. And when they stayed, they met the people who were already there. The Hebrides, that long, fractured chain of islands running down the western edge of Scotland, acquired a new name in the Norse era. The Gaels called them Inskall, the islands of the foreigners. It is a name that tells you something important. The Norse were not absorbed anonymously into an existing population. They were visible, distinct, and powerful enough to rename an entire geography after themselves. What made the Hebrides so valuable to Norse settlers was exactly what had made the region strategically significant for centuries before them. The islands commanded the sea lanes. The Irish Sea, which connects what is now Scotland. Ireland, northern England, Wales, and the Isle of Man is not a barrier. It is a highway. Whoever controlled the islands and headlands that define its edges controlled the movement of ships, and ships meant trade, tribute, and military reach. The Norse settlers who arrived in the Hebrides in the mid-9th century brought with them the most sophisticated seafaring technology in the North Atlantic. The longship is so deeply embedded in popular imagination that it is easy to underestimate just how radical an engineering achievement it represented. These vessels were built with a clinker hull design, overlapping planks that gave the hull flexibility in heavy seas and a shallow enough draft. This allowed them to navigate coastal shallows and river mouths that would have defeated heavier Mediterranean-style ships. They could be beached directly on shore, meaning no harbor infrastructure was required for a landing. In an archipelago world, this was everything. But technological supremacy does not, by itself, build a civilization. For that, you need people. And people, when they live alongside one another for long enough, eventually become something neither party was before. The term Gall-Ghàidheil, foreign Gaels, appears in Irish annals as early as the mid-9th century. It is one of the most evocative labels in the medieval record, applied with a mixture of contempt and bewilderment, to a population that the annalists found genuinely difficult to categorize. These were people who had Norse blood and Gaelic blood. They prayed in the Gaelic Christian tradition while bearing Norse names and organized households according to Gaelic kinship structures, all while sailing Norse ships. They were in the phrase that most historians now use, the Norse-Gaels. The mechanisms of this synthesis were not romantic. They were the mechanisms of conquest and cohabitation. Norse men taking Gaelic wives or concubines, the children of those unions raised in households that drew from both traditions. Over 2 or 3 generations, the boundaries between colonizer and colonized became genuinely unclear, which is to say they became genuinely interesting. What the Norse contributed to this fusion was primarily material and organizational. Shipbuilding techniques, navigation, and long-distance trade. And a particular model of political authority organized around the sea rather than around land. In continental European feudalism, power derived from the control of territory, of soil, of agricultural surplus, In the Norse-Gaelic world, power derived from the control of water, of passage, the ability to project force and presence across a maritime network. What the Gaels contributed was equally essential, though less visible in the archaeological record. Gaelic society was organized around kinship, around the derbfine, the extended family group whose internal loyalties defined a man's place. Gaelic Christianity had a particular character. It was monastic, intensely literary, and deeply embedded in the local landscape. This gave its institutions remarkable durability. In Gaelic law, the Brehon tradition provided a sophisticated framework for resolving disputes. It regulated land use that continued to function long after the Norse overlay had settled on top of it. The result was not a simple average of two cultures. It was a synthesis that produced something neither parent tradition could have generated alone. A maritime polity, organized around the Gaelic model of family and loyalty, wielding Norse tools of war and commerce, and operating across a geographic space defined entirely by water. The first recognizable political figure in this world is Ketill Flatnose, a Norse chieftain. He established dominance over the Hebrides in the second half of the 9th century, according to Icelandic sagas. The sagas were written centuries later, requiring careful handling. They are literature as much as history, with a line not always easy to find. Ketill was sent by Harald Finnhair, consolidating Norway under single rule. His mission: bring Hebridean Norse settlements under royal authority. According to sagas, Ketill went and simply did not return. He established his own power base in the islands. When Harald demanded his return, Ketill offered neither. This act of defiance captures the Norse-Gaelic world's political character. It was, from the beginning, resistant to centralized authority. Ketill's family became the seat of the dynasty of the Isles. His descendants, through Norse and Gaelic marriages, ruled the Hebrides for generations. Odd the Deep-Minded is a vivid saga figure. She converted to Christianity and settled in Iceland. Her lineage blended Norway, Hebrides, and Ireland. The literal truth matters less than what these accounts reveal. They show how the Norse-Gaelic ruling class understood itself. They claimed descent from both worlds, wearing this doubleness with pride. They had little patience for rulers expecting simple obedience. Their society was built on sea, stone, and independence. By the 11th century, the Kingdom of the Isles took shape. Its geography was unique among medieval polities. No contiguous landmass, no central capital. Instead, it was a network: Hebrides, Isle of Man. Territories along Ireland and Scotland, connected by sea lanes. This state, organized around maritime supremacy, is called a Thalassocracy. From the Greek for Cyril, the term fits the Kingdom of the Isles precisely. The King of the Isles was, above all, a naval power. His authority derived from his ability to maintain a fleet, to move forces quickly across water and be present at critical points, faster than any land-based rival could respond. The Berlin was the vessel that made this possible. Development of the Norse longship, adapted to local conditions. Lighter and more maneuverable, it defined western Scottish coast for centuries. A lord with 30 Berlins had real authority, regardless of documents. The Isle of Man sat at the center of this maritime network. Geographically and politically, it was equidistant from Ireland, Scotland, England, and Wales, accessible from every direction, yet difficult for any single power to dominate. Its kings dealt with Norwegian, Dublin, Scottish, and English interests, playing each against the others with practiced pragmatism. What legitimized this kingdom was not military force alone. The Norse-Gaelic ruling class had been thoroughly Christianized. Monasteries like Iona and Lismore provided the ecclesiastical framework. Kings presented themselves as legitimate Christian rulers. Norse paganism had faded. What remained was a distinctly Gaelic Christianity, housed in stone churches, blending Irish and Scandinavian building traditions. In 1831, on the Isle of Lewis, a cache of carved figures was discovered in a sandbank near Oog Bay, 93 pieces, carved from walrus ivory and whale tooth, depicting kings, queens, bishops, and knights, armed warriors chewing their shields, a gesture of battle fury as art historians interpret it. The Lewis Chessmen are now among the most recognizable artifacts in the British Museum. They date to the 12th century, the high noon of the Kingdom of the Isles, likely made in Norway, perhaps a merchant stock, a commission, or treasure in transit. Their burial circumstances remain unknown. They tell us the Kingdom of the Isles was not a backwater, but a center of artistic sophistication. The queen pieces are among the earliest depictions of queens in chess, documenting a key transition. Fascinatingly Norse-Gaelic, the warrior rooks draw from Norse military tradition. The bishops reflect the Christian overlay provided by Gaelic tradition. In ivory no larger than a hand, the synthesis of 2 centuries stood carved and painted, ready to play. The 12th century produced Somerled, who defines the Kingdom of the Isles in historical imagination. His name, Somerled, is Norse in origin, meaning summer traveler. Somerled's life embodied every contradiction of the world he ruled. He emerged from the mixed Norse-Gaelic aristocracy of Argyll in the early 12th century, period when the Kingdom of the Isles was under Norwegian overlordship. Somerled carved out a domain that acknowledged neither master fully. His military career combined land and sea operations, reflecting his dual inheritance. By the 1150s, he controlled Argyll and much of the southern Hebrides. In 1156, he fought a naval engagement against his brother-in-law, Gall-Ghàidheil II of Man. This split the Kingdom of the Isles, Somerled taking the southern islands, Gall-Ghàidheil retaining Man and the northern Hebrides. The battle established Somerled as the dominant power on the western seaboard. In 1164, Somerled led a formidable fleet of 160 ships up the River Clyde toward Glasgow. His objective is debated, a bid for kingship or a punitive expedition. What is certain is that he was killed at Renfrew, probably assassinated, before any battle was fought. He died as he had lived, larger than the categories available to contain him. Somerled's descendants divided his territory, becoming founding ancestors of great clans. The MacDonald's clan Donald traced their lineage to his son Domhnall More. The Lords of the Isles, his political heirs, dominated Scottish Western politics for 3 centuries. The Lewis Chessmen and Somerled's legacy intertwine, revealing the rich history of the Kingdom of the Isles. By the mid-13th century, the political landscape around the Kingdom of the Isles had shifted, making its independence difficult to sustain. Scotland, under capable kings, consolidated its authority, pushing outward. The Norwegian crown tried to tighten its grip on distant possessions, whose loyalty was always negotiable. The crisis came in 1263. King Haakon IV of Norway assembled one of the largest fleets ever to sail from Norway. He brought it west to assert Norwegian authority over the Hebrides and force a settlement with King Alexander III. The expedition aimed for a final clarification. Norway would dominate the western seas, settling island sovereignty. It was not settled in Norway's favor. The campaign reached the Firth of Clyde in October, a late-season timing. On October 2, 1263, a portion of Haakon's fleet was caught in a storm off Largs in Ayrshire. A skirmish followed on the beach where Scots engaged Norwegian forces who had come ashore. The Battle of Largs was more confusion than catastrophe. Storm damage and late season broke momentum. Haakon withdrew northward and died in Orkney that same winter, in December 1263. Political consequences were clear. The Scottish crown quickly asserted authority in the Hebrides. In 1266, the Treaty of Perth formalized this new reality. Norway ceded the Hebrides and the Isle of Man to Scotland for a substantial payment. The Norse era in the Scottish Islands was formally over. But formal endings are rarely actual endings. The Norse-Gaelic culture did not dissolve. It transformed. Great families like the MacDonalds, MacDougals, and MacLeods continued to operate. They preserved cultural and political traditions they had inherited. The Lordship of the Isles, established by the MacDonalds, is a continuation of the Kingdom of the Isles. They maintained their own court, patronage networks, relationship with Ireland, and their own fleet. They addressed the King of Scotland from a position of equality, not subordination. The Scottish crown found this infuriating, eventually revoking the lordship in 1493. This created a political vacuum, a source of instability for 2 centuries. Gaelic language, the primary cultural medium, survived as the tongue of the Western Highlands and Islands. Norse loanwords embedded in Scottish Gaelic are a linguistic record of the synthesis, traces of the Viking presence that neither conquest nor treaty could erase. The clan system defined the Scottish Highlands until the 18th century. At its core, it was a Gaelic kinship model. This model survived the Norse arrival intact and was exported through Norse-Gaelic synthesis into the emerging Scottish kingdom. Loyalty to the chief territory organized around family, military retinue, and personal honor were not medieval inventions. They were inheritances from a much older world, passed down through the Gall-Ghàidheil to the clans that emerged. The Kingdom of the Isles left behind not dismantled institutions or absorbed political entities. It left a way of being, a culture oriented toward the sea, organized around kinship. Comfortable between identities, it resisted the idea that geography should determine political allegiance. The people of the Hebrides were Norse, Gaelic, Scottish, and simply themselves. Their kingdom lasted for centuries. Its traces are still visible in names on maps, in boat prows, and in the faces of people today. A weathered fishing boat with a distinctively shaped prow, reminiscent of ancient designs, docked in a small, bustling harbor. The Kingdom of the Isles did not end in a single moment. It faded. Not into silence, but into absorption, into structures that replaced it, into languages carrying its memory, into bloodlines that no longer needed to name what they were made of. What disappears in history is rarely erased. More often, it is layered over. The Norse-Gaelic world did not vanish. It became something else, something quieter, something less visible, but no less real. And that is the pattern we return to, again and again. Civilizations rise with clarity. They endure through adaptation, and they leave behind not just ruins, but inheritances. If this journey across the Irish Sea has stayed with you, I invite you to continue exploring with us. Subscribe to Whispered Chronicles. Echoes of forgotten lore. We trace the hidden structures of history, systems, cultures, and moments where worlds overlap. And I'd like to hear from you. Do you think cultures ever truly disappear, or simply change form? Share your thoughts below. Your perspective is part of what keeps these stories alive. Thank you for watching. Until the next whisper, stay curious and stay safe.